Welcome back to the Moot Workshop. In the first video about the 1930 Brunswick Model 15 radio, we disassembled the thing, and now it's time to start to restore it piece by piece. One thing that obviously needs to be done is the speaker cone is damaged and very fragile. There's no way we can use the original cone. So we're going to have to start over from scratch with the cone, and that's a big enough project that it warrants a video all to its own. So we're going to recone a 91-year-old speaker, this time on the Moot Workshop.
Closely with research. This is a...
So as you can see, the speaker is in really bad shape. Somebody even used masking tape to put the cone back on the thing. So we disassembled the speaker, and now here's the cone. And there's that nasty masking tape, which got to come off of there. All right, we need to do some measurements of the cone to make sure that our geometry on our pattern is correct. So we're measuring the actual speaker itself, which is 10 inches in diameter. We're going to use this caliper and the extension on the bottom of it to measure how deep the cone itself is. And it's basically 3 inches. And we're going to measure the hole that we need in the bottom of it where the coil goes. And that's about 1 3/4 of an inch. Now, if we map all that out on paper, we can work out how long the sides are going to be at an angle. And therefore how big the radius is going to be of the entire pattern. Now we're going to have to do a little bit of math to work out some sizes here. We have to figure out how much of the circle that we need to use to make the cone be the right diameter. Basically, it's going to be 288 degrees of the entire 360. So 288 degrees works out to be just about here. So that's where our seam would be. But you'll notice that the seam is curved. The reason we have a curved seam is because if you were to put this together with a straight seam, with just a little bit of an overlap, it would tend to fold right at the seam. But with a curved seam, it distributes that around the edge of it and it stays in a nice cone shape. So here's our curve and the overlap that we're going to have. Now we have to make the little tabs that will secure the voice coil to the back end of the cone. There's 20 tabs in the original speaker, and I'm just kind of freehanding how big these are. I did an estimate. You can see how fragile this is. One of the things that we have on the ends of it are these little overlaps, and the idea there is so that we don't have to hold how far it overlaps because it'll line itself up. It's easier to see than to explain. We've put the pattern onto this piece of heavy cardstock. We're going to cut it out with an X-Acto knife. Now you can see how that overlap actually works, and it holds together really well. Now right here we have the wires secured to the cone with thread, so I'm going to cut those out, and I'm going to remove the voice coil from the bottom of the cone. It's all held on with what appears to be epoxy. Now let's make the cone. I've got a very large piece of black construction paper, which is just about the right thickness and just about the right stiffness, and obviously the right color. I'm tracing the pattern onto the construction paper. Now I'll cut that out. Now we'll glue the seam together with some epoxy. Trying to tack the top edge here down so that it won't stick up. Now we're ready to put the voice coil into it. I'm going to tack a couple of these tabs down with super glue using some accelerant, because I'm not convinced I can keep these lined up while I put the epoxy on. So now let's glue those tabs down with the epoxy. Put some epoxy around the middle of the cone and stuck the spider in there. I had to weigh it down with a couple of bottles of paint to make sure it would sit perfectly flat. Now right here is where those wires were sewn on, and they were right on the seam. See, here they are, they still stitched together. They were right on the seam, but I didn't do the seam right. I put the wires on just a little bit off, so I'm going to put this little patch on there so that it's got a thick, solid spot to stitch it to. So more epoxy. Epoxy is our friend. Now I just have to get these two wires set up to solder onto those very thin wires coming off of the voice coil. This is modern wire, but it has on the outside of it a fabric jacket to make it look like antique wire. So it has all the advantages and safety factor of modern wire, but it looks vintage. It looks like it belongs on this 91-year-old thing. So now that we got the wires soldered on, we need to attach them to the side of the cone. First, I'm going to epoxy the top of them to make sure they stay nice and tight on there and they're well protected. Now I have to stitch these into the cone. I didn't know there was going to be sewing in this video. After a few crisscross stitches, there we are. It's not quite as tidy as the original, but it looks pretty good and it looks pretty period. So now we're ready. We'll continue with the restoration of the speaker next time on the Moot Workshop. Hi, thanks for watching. If you really liked that video, please click the like button. And if you like what we do in general, please subscribe, because that not only lets YouTube know that you like us, but it also lets you know when we have a new video, and we do post a new video every week. And if you really want to encourage this behavior, head on over to our Patreon, because your contributions will help us get exhibits for the museum, but more importantly, it'll help buy us parts and supplies that we need to refurbish and otherwise restore these items so that they work and they're in the best condition they can be. Thanks again.